Okay. Well, without further ado, because we have a lot to talk about today, I would like to welcome back to the webinar sessions Miss Sarah Yu. Sarah, are you there with us out there in the world of the internet? There you are.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you great. Welcome back, Sarah.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure.
Okay.
So before I give the floor to Sarah, I just want to say that I want you all to save all of your questions. So during the webinar, you may have some questions. I want you to save them for the end of the session, where we will have a Q&A segment, right? So at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a Q&A segment, and that's a great chance for you to ask your questions. And so that we can all see them. So when you ask your questions at the end, make sure to put a question mark in the chat box so that the system recognizes it as a question and that we can pop it up on screen for everybody to see. So let us begin without further ado. Sarah, welcome once again, and let me just pop up the presentation for you. If you need anything, I'm right here behind the curtain.
Thanks a lot, Terry. So, good morning, everyone, on this stormy, bizarre weather day, and happy new academic year. Welcome to Success in ECPE Writing with updated information and tips, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Yu. I'm the co-author of the series All-American C1, C2, as well as an examiner and teacher, and I'll be addressing a lot of the concerns that teachers have had over the past year with the revised ECPE. According to the MLA, the Michigan Language Assessment Guidelines, which I should mention are available online on very informative YouTube videos and on their website. I really suggest, if you haven't seen them, to look at them. I will also be discussing how to best use the All-American C1, C2 course series to prepare your students for the ECPEs, specifically with the new revisions. Okay, so before we start, I just want to give us all a gentle reminder that these are very chaotic times. It's not just the COVID, it's the fires, the floods, everything. And all of our students need our support, our empathy, and our optimism more than ever before. So please bear that in mind within your new teaching year. And I will do my best at the end to answer all of your questions and concerns. I will also be posting my personal email in case I don't have time to get to all of them. Okay, so let's start with the requirements of the CEFR. I'm sure you've all heard of them over and over again, and it just seems like a lot of jargon. But to be honest, the requirements of the CEFR, the Common European Framework, have become a gold standard for all over the world for English language teaching, and they are the basis of the MLA's criteria for the writing, and for all of the aspects, actually, for speaking as well. So let's take a quick look at what they want. I've simplified it so that it's just more accessible, but any questions you may have, please ask me at the end. So they say that they want clear, smoothly flowing, complex writing which presents a case. There's a lot there in that one sentence. Clear, so it's very easy to understand. Smoothly flowing is talking about fluency, obviously, which is what we aim for. It's not the easiest thing to actually teach, but you need to encourage your students to be as fluent as possible in their speaking and writing. And complex writing, so we're not writing simple subject-verb sentences. There needs to be engaging descriptions of experience for the right genre. There are two aspects here. The MLA keeps emphasizing authorial voice, which we will talk about a few times today, because that is a source of confusion. Authorial voice means making your writing original and engaging so that the reader wants to read it, right? And the right genre has to do with the formal structure of an academic abstract essay versus the more semi-formal, more lively article, or the formal, once again, but concrete style of the proposal. They want a logical structure so the organization is easily comprehensible. This I will go into a bit more later, but it has to do with, at the C2 level, we are trying to veer away from those classic, on the other hand, Secondly, these are artificial and they're needed because students aren't having an internal structure or flow in their writing. So a part of our job is to help them plan it well enough so one point flows into the other. Multiple perspectives with a clear point of view. This is also something I need to emphasize. The MLA clearly states, and the CFR, that they want the pros, the cons, one side, the other, and then the student's point of view, right? Sometimes the student's point of view can be incorporated into, we always start with the side we don't agree with, so then we go to the side we do agree with, so it becomes very clear. They're even happy if you state your point of view either in the introduction or in the conclusion, but the student's individual point of view has to be there, right? A wide range of grammar and vocabulary using idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms, if they're appropriate, of course, with awareness of connotation. Now, this is where the vocabulary sections and the articles of the All-American course series are very, very useful. We do a lot of work of new vocabulary and repeating words with it and having testing on it. There are tests in every unit. There are tests in every unit of the the workbook rather. There are tests. There's a test book, right? So there's a lot of repetition of vocabulary because this is the best way for students to learn vocabulary. I just want to point out here about vocabulary. Please don't crowd your students' brains with a million zillion words. You'll always have those students who want to learn everything. It's just not possible. So there are 3 layers of vocabulary. Bear in mind that we have the first level, which is the absolutely crucial vocabulary that they need not just to learn, but to recycle and to use in their speaking and their writing. We also have the level of vocabulary that's the second level, which is important because it gives meaning to a text or a sentence. And then we have the third level, which is what I call the fluff. If they really want to jot it down, they can, and maybe, in the long-term memory, they'll keep it somehow. But we cannot say that every word or expression is of the same importance because there's just too much. Everyone here knows we have a very specific vocabulary in English and a lot of words to express the same thing. So the next page, this is also available online. It's the writing scale. I just want to quickly translate this for you. Okay, I know a lot of you have seen this and it's like, okay, whatever, I get that. But what you need to see is the criteria. It doesn't matter if they're rating it from 1 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 7. The first is task completion. I think that the best way to fail the writing is to be off topic, right? So you have to say, were you on topic? Did you consider the multiple viewpoints that I mentioned before? Did you express your opinion? And did you integrate at least one source? Now, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the sources because that is the new element of the revised examination. But one source must be in there, right? The development. So development is about structure and content. This is all about the brainstorming beforehand, which I will also talk about later. Does the organization of the paragraphs, the flow, does it make sense, right? Do you provide support and examples for your points? This is a very important one. Often the test takers end up writing just a list of different points. They think, the more I can come up with, the better. Not true. It's far, far better to come up with an entire paragraph with one central point, which you support with examples and sources, than to have 4 points in one paragraph. I think 1 or 2 points maximum is more than enough. The language, grammatical control and vocabulary range. Is your grammar accurate? This is what we're also teaching them, of course. Using advanced C2 vocabulary and expressions. And the sentences to be interesting and complex. So they're not mundane, repetitive. As I said before, subject, verb, subject, verb. This has a lot to do with our teaching and our emphasis. I think that most of you will share my belief that even at the C2 level, I've had students ask, not understand the difference between present simple and present continuous. So please, as teachers, be patient, refresh their memories. Remember, it's a foreign language. They do forget even basic things, all right? And here we go again with the authorial voice, which they set up as, something that they emphasize. This is about originality and reader engagement. Now, it plays a larger or smaller role. For example, I would say that in articles, authorial voice is really important. So you want to use rhetorical questions, you want to use first person, you want to use personal experiences and what you've learned from them, all right? But even in the essays and in the proposal, it's fine to use personal experience. Now, often the proposals have to do with a business type background, so it might be harder, but you need to encourage students to pretend like it's a real situation and they're addressing an actual issue and what would they believe, right? Whether it's about working hours or working from home or, you know, a new system at the office. Okay, and also going back to the article, you have to be persuasive. The article wants the reader to read it, right? They're not obliged to read it. So it's on some kind of platform like online or in a magazine or something like that. So the reader needs to show an awareness of the audience. For example, if it's a student magazine, he or she is talking to peers, right? So that's basically what the writing scale is about. So let's talk about the topic types, just so that we're very clear. I'm sure after about a year of teaching this, most of you are familiar. There's always a choice of two topics. One is always an essay, and the other one is either a proposal and article. Now, I'm feeling that a lot of teachers are making the mistake of only teaching the essay, believing that the proposals and articles are too complicated or they're not able to do it. And I strongly disagree with this because, to be honest, for example, the proposals are more likely to, it's easier to use set expressions in the introduction and the conclusion. For example, I'm writing this proposal in response to your request for, and in the conclusion, you can almost always use, thank you for taking my opinion into consideration. I'm available for further discussion at your disposal. So all of these are in the writing sections of the All-American C1, C2. Every unit deals with either an article, a proposal, or an essay. So there's a language bank and there's vocabulary everywhere for you to look at. And articles are, as I said, more lively, more imaginative, more informal. What you need to do is to recognize and help students recognize what their best genre is, right? And they can only do this through practice. And without this being officially true, I suspect that the evaluators go a little bit easier on the proposals and articles because they are less popular. So their expectations are not as high and there's more breathing space for students to be creative. That's my take on it. So what's new? Well, I guess the main thing is sources. I think when a lot of us saw sources, it kind of freaked us out a bit. And I'm sure when students see them, especially if they're in that really young range that some of the test takers are, like 14, 13, it's something that they're unfamiliar with even in their native language. So we have to breathe and understand that they're extremely simple, all right? So the 3 sources are provided that apply to both of the topics, and the candidates must incorporate at least one of the sources. So I'm going to deal with 3 questions: what, how, and where. So here is an example. You can't really see it, but it's you can understand what the graphs are. The charts are simple. The graphs are simple. It's nothing like the IELTS, where you have to summarize all of the information in 2 different visual sources. It's nothing like that. They're very simple things. What I've seen from the samples they have online, there's always a quotation. Okay. But the graphs, the figures, the simple charts, they usually deal with both sides of the issue, but indirectly. They are not points themselves. I'm going to talk about this more, but this was a very common criticism in the benchmarks when students were using the source as an actual point, and they should not do that. All right, so let's go to the next slide. How to incorporate a source. How many? Well, they say at least 1, and 1 is more than enough. So if a student has particular difficulty in the incorporation, which I think with a lot of practice they shouldn't, but let's say that they do, 1 is enough, but there has to be that 1. Should they be paraphrased? It's a very common question. I don't think the quotes are good to paraphrase, usually. They can be, but like for example, I think it's very nice to use the quotes in either the introduction or the conclusion. Like, for example, you could start with your introduction saying, according to scientists, blah, 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 and then you put the quote in quotations about, let's say, genetic engineering. And then the student would say, however, this is, or they could say, this is an opinion I would like to examine in the essay below. That's more than fine for an introduction. It's a really good idea to get them to have a few standard introductions up their sleeve, because that's really where they get stuck, just putting pen to paper, and they often lose a lot of time. So that's one idea for an introduction. But on the other hand, paraphrasing, especially of the statistics, the graphs, the charts, etc., shows that the student has a higher command of the language. And I think it's a very good exercise to do. There are exercises, of course, like this in the All-American series. It's a really good idea to have the students paraphrase and learn how to just say, a chart from 2020 explains how this new policy could be detrimental because blah, blah, blah. Okay. The introductory phrases to attribute. According to Ms. X, a teacher states that there's a lot of these again, you must put them. Otherwise, it's almost like plagiarism. The assessors feel like you're using the sources as if they're your own ideas. So I cannot emphasize strongly enough how important it is to attribute the sources to, at the end of the source, there's always like in italics, a little like a 2020 survey or, something like that. You must mention that. The students must mention that. Okay. Where to incorporate the sources? I said the introduction and the conclusion to support the main points. And I'm going to repeat myself. The sources are not points themselves. You have to connect them to an argument. There's a benchmark that they have online where the student literally wrote the rubric as an introduction, and then the sources as his essay. And it was ridiculous. And it was, of course, a fail. All right. The rubric has to be rephrased. Discourage them from using any of the words except for the keywords. So if it's about genetic engineering, obviously they have to use that. Encourage them to use the passive instead of the active. They can start stealing little phrases and words as the essay goes on, or what I like to do is put it into the conclusion, but not in their introduction. The rubric has to be completely rephrased in their own words. It's the first impression that they're giving the assessor, and they need to give a good one, right? So also for the sources, they are not the points. You have to connect them to the argument. They are trying to see how seamlessly the sources can be incorporated into the student's writing. Of course, the sources themselves, when they're doing their brainstorming, can be used for them to come up and should be used with the main point. So, for example, if the source says 87% of the population is against genetic engineering, the point is not that. The point is genetic engineering does not have the support of the public on a wider level. And then you say, according to a survey, and that's how you use it. The point is not the source. Okay, I think I've said that enough. I'll try not to say it again. Here are some general points for all three topic types. Okay, we have brainstorming and planning. This is where they get to think about where they're going to incorporate their sources or how they can use the source to support a bigger point. This is where they have the logical flow of ideas, because it's very often the case that you emotionally identify with one side, but then as you start brainstorming and writing things down, you're like, wait a second here, I can't really support that. I remember a famous topic was about do athletes deserve the really huge salaries that they receive? And most students would say, no. I mean, some of them are getting like $1 million, $2 million a game. And there's doctors and teachers who, make peanuts compared to that. But then when they brainstormed and wrote down their ideas, they realized that they really couldn't support that, because there are a lot of reasons to justify concrete reasons, why athletes are paid so highly. I think the strongest one being that they generate this income through the ticket sales and that they have to work so hard, and et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't until the students got down to brainstorm the topic that they realized that they can't support the side that they first thought that they wanted to. And so they had to switch the whole order. And imagine doing that as you're writing and having to start all over again. That would be insane. So that's where we do it, the brainstorming. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about brainstorming, but it is incredibly important. Please do not skip this stage. Every writing unit in All-American has brainstorming exercises. Use them to guide you in your classroom. All right. The second point, which I've already touched on, but let's talk about it again, develop your arguments. There's a point, and then you support it with examples. They love personal examples, even in the formal essays. They just have to be presented in a formal way. And again, how the student felt about it or what the student learned from this. And again, of course they can lie. You know, students are always like, yeah, but I don't have any. Just pretend that you did. Use the source and just explain it, right? The more you explain a point, the better it will be. The higher the level of your writing will be. So the total is 4 to 5 paragraphs, including the introduction and conclusion. In the All-American, I think almost all of the essays or writing the proposals and articles are 4 paragraphs, but 5 is better if the student has a compromising opinion. What do I mean? So you start with the introduction, that's 1 paragraph. Then you 1 paragraph for the side that you don't agree with or agree with less, a side that you support more strongly, and then there may be the need for a 3rd body paragraph that explains why you believe what you believe, or why a compromise would be better, or something in between, or even in the proposal, another alternative. That would be really appropriate for the proposal. You know, should staff be required to work from home? So you would say yes for these reasons, no for these reasons. However, I believe that this should be an option. I'm just giving an example off the top of my head. So if the student's opinion is strong and different from either side, it definitely needs to be in total a 5-paragraph piece of writing. Remember what I said before, the logical flow will make the artificial connectors less necessary. We are beyond the level where we use moreover, in addition, and especially firstly, secondly, thirdly. Please discourage them from using numbers. Now, for your weaker students, I understand how this can give them organization and definitely give clarity, because these are, you know, indicators to the evaluator of where the essay is going. So if you have a weaker writer or a more challenged writer, let's not use negative words, who are just looking for a pass, and when they don't use the connectors, they end up with a jumbled mess. Okay, I get it there. But the ideal essay has such a logical flow that it doesn't really need them. I mean, you can use things like ultimately or another point that must be considered. Those are more integrated connectors rather than those artificial moreover, furthermore, etc. It's a big shift from the B2 level, because I know at B2, they need those to organize themselves. But at C2, the MLA is very clear that they prefer they not be used, if it makes sense, though. By all means, if you need the connectors to make sense, that's the priority. The wide range of grammar and vocabulary, that's really where All-American can help, as I've already mentioned. Now, it's really important that students leave 5 minutes at the end for checking. Because, let's face it, if a student doesn't pass, in the majority of cases, he or she has failed by 5 or 10%. Those 5 or 10% could be the mistakes, and usually are the mistakes that they made that they know are wrong. For example, spelling or grammar, incomplete sentences. They need those minutes to check over, because it could be the difference between passing and failing, especially for those borderline students. Even though the MLA says that spelling is not penalized, my inner voice tells me that cannot be true, because they do say, for example, one student in a benchmark had pretty poor spelling, and they said structural errors made comprehension difficult. So for me, that's just a fancy way of saying his spelling was really, really weak. All right. What I find the best way is to train your students is to train them to write the essay part in 30 minutes, not 40 as I've written here, because they need those 5 minutes for brainstorming, then to write it in 30, and then to check it in 5. That's what I mean by the 40. That's the total, 40. And then if you always, when you do in-class work, and I really think that you should have some in-class writing on a regular basis. I know that's a lot of marking. And for example, this year I have a massive class. So yes, it is challenging. But the in-class is where you can really gauge what they're doing, when they're doing. I actually walk around, or I'll say 5 minutes is up, you should be done with the brainstorming. Or I'll say, you have 5 minutes left, please start checking or doing the editing work. But I always bear in mind that they have 40 minutes, not 45. So when they actually go on the day of the exam, it just seems like they have more time. And there's this weird phenomenon that I've noticed with a lot of after the exam, a lot of students come out and they say, I have no problem with the time limit otherwise, but it just felt like time was going a lot faster, which it does when they feel like stressed or anxious. So use 40 as the limit in your mind in classroom work. When they write at home, they're going to take bathroom breaks, water breaks, food breaks, social media breaks. It's just not the same thing. So we need to recreate that feeling. I mean, use A4 paper, make them use pencils. It's another point I wanted to briefly touch on. It seems that in many school systems, especially here in Greece, where we're talking, the beauty of the actual presentation of a piece of writing is high priority. In American or foreign exams, it's not. I mean, kids can have an eraser and they can erase things. That's the beauty of writing in pencil, unlike the Cambridge exam, for example. But they can just also cross it out. As long as it's comprehensible and legible, the examiner has absolutely no problems. Smudges, whatever. You have to help your students get over that ingrained sense that the essay has to look beautiful. It does not. Again, I mentioned here about not repeating words or expressions or ideas used in the rubrics or in the sources. If you're paraphrasing them, rephrase them and develop. So hold on, let me go to the next one. Here are some ideas for brainstorming. And I don't know if your classrooms are in rows or you're doing private lessons. If you're doing private lessons, it's a bit more difficult because you're going to have to interact with your student. But everything is still doable. So divide your class into 2 groups. Give each group one side of an issue. So I'm just going to stick with genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is positive, it's negative. Have them discuss the main points to argue that their side is stronger, regardless of their personal beliefs. I think it's really funny when you put someone who doesn't want to be on one side as the leader. For example, someone who's into veganism and cares about the environment, make them pro-genetic engineering and see what they come up with. Always encourage them to find reasons why, and then hold a class debate between the 2 groups. I think the art of debating is massively helpful to any language learning, even of your native language. And also the process of thought is helpful to writing, to expressing yourself. I would highly recommend it. Another exercise is to assign short presentations to your students. You can base them on the topics in the All-American book and have them do it beforehand. So in the writing, there's always 2, even in the exercises, some subtopics. So this makes them simultaneously practice their public speaking skills, which in this day and age, I think 90% of your students will be needing to handle public presentations. And a lot of them are terrified. I think it's the first biggest fear that people have, the second after flying. They need to stand up in front of the class, address their classmates. And even if you have a private student, record it on video. Do something to make them anxious. Yeah, it sounds kind of sadistic, but okay, it's for their own good. Have them make an interesting PowerPoint presentation, hold a class discussion. They can have surveys, they can hand out things. Have them take control of the classroom, basically. If possible, in a physical classroom, sit with the students and watch them. Make photocopies of a spider graph or make one on your board. have students fill them in with various ideas and make sure they come up with reasons and examples. We always ask ourselves, why, right? Why? Okay. Now, this is, here are 2 pages from the All-American Writing. It's a passage from articles. You probably can't see it clearly, but it's not necessary. In the student book, there's always a first topic and an exercise to evaluate the 3 sources, so to translate them into simple English. Then, so there's these questions, and then there's always a model article essay proposal, all right? So, All-American is aims to assist students in general in writing. So there is some information, for example, about one-sided opinion essays. Those are standard standard in the MSU exams. In fact, I don't know if they're going to change this to align with this CFR, but MSU says that they prefer one side, which for me is really a lot more challenging, because that clearly means that you have to develop the side like at a very deep level, and not very many students are capable of that. They don't have a problem if you have two sides, but they say they prefer, or they're fine with one side. So that does not apply to the ECPE, all right? You need to give multiple viewpoints. So I just want to mention here that shortly there will be an online writing supplement available where I have tailored each writing unit, including the topics, to be completely aligned with the ECPE requirements in the topic expression and how to deal with them. A lot of our teachers have reached out and asked if we need titles for the article or the essay. They do not say you have to have them. Some students like putting them in. I would never suggest that they start with a title. I've seen students spend 10 minutes trying to come up with a good title, for example. No. I would recommend to your students that if, when you finished, you come up with an interesting title, which could take the form of a question, or it could be an actual quote from the writing itself. Yes, like leave a space. Don't start writing at the top of the paper. Leave a space down and put the title there. As far as titles for proposals go, MLA is very clear about this. They're fine with them. They're fine without them. In the proposals in the writing supplement available online on the Hamilton House website, I'm not sure if it's uploaded yet, but it will be shortly. I have provided optional titles for each paragraph. So titles like the connectors can really help the students. I mean, they're very simple. Introduction, benefits of genetic engineering, drawbacks of genetic engineering, my recommendation, conclusion. That's simple. Whether they put them or not, completely up to them. If it helps them, it helps them. If it doesn't, they don't need them. So that was the model essay. There are some questions about it. So there's always 3 pages for writing in every unit, and it's always thematically related to the unit itself. So in the next 2 pages, the double page spread, is all for the writing. So here you can see, think about language and generally how to use passive voice, for example, because in this unit, in the grammar section, passive voice was dealt with. So there's a very nice tying in with the structural learning that the students are doing in other sections of the unit with the writing unit. There's a lot of assistance on brainstorming. Sometimes other topics are given, and then there's a second topic that it's close to the first one, but different, where there are 3 new sources, there's a new topic, there's brainstorming advice, there's organizational advice. Again, it's advice. So in the writing supplement, I have changed this to reflect 5 paragraphs when applicable, or when I personally considered it to be more conducive to fulfilling what the topic is asking. All right. Now, there's exam strategy, which has like point-on advice about, traps that kids could fall into. And then there's a language bank in every writing unit that gives you some specific expressions that are especially good for this particular topic. So that's about the All-American. Just wrapping up some miscellaneous point. Again, authorial voice is emphasized. I've talked about this enough. Generally, writing should express opinions in an interesting way with concrete, tangible examples. All right. Avoid overusing the rubric. Yeah, I think that I've gone over most of this. Think about the register, formal or semi-formal. It's never informal. There's never contractions, all right? Using the first person is considered to be semi-formal. So apart from a relevant example to support something in an essay or proposal, I think it should be avoided. Length is not specified. They're very clear about that. They care about development more than length. I kind of find that a little bit annoying, to be honest, because it would be helpful to say we expect 300 to 350 words, which I think is the general expectation of the C2 level. They do say that 2 pages, which I find to be a bit heavy, depending on the size of that candidate's handwriting, is usually needed. I think 1.5 pages is a good thing to have in your mind. Again, depending on the size. I've had students with massive handwriting and students with tiny handwriting. So 1 page is generally too short to have those 4 or 5 paragraphs if you've developed them at all, right? Okay, the introduction and conclusion only need to be 2-sentence paragraphs. And the conclusion, you can even get away with 1 sentence. But those 2 or 3 paragraphs in between, they need words to develop. So I think that in your mind, without officially telling students, I would just say 1 page would be too short. So something over 1 page, 1.5, 2, etc. Again, about the titles, to time their writing. Make your mock exams as authentic as possible. I've talked about that. So yes, I've covered all the miscellaneous points. A word from our sponsor. These are the components of the All-American course series. There's a companion, which I don't rely so much on. The workbook complements the student's book perfectly. The test book, I hold on to those when I have a large class, and I just give them out at the end of every unit. And I have students mark each other's. At this level, you certainly don't want to be collecting their books and marking them. So just just have them switch, mark them. There's a really interesting Hamilton House digital platform available. It's a multi-platform online learning management system. Now that sounds like a mouthful of words, but basically what it is it allows you to track what your students are doing, how long their exercises have taken them, on the online exercises, of course, what scores they got, and even if you don't consistently check them, the awareness that their teacher has access to the information might give them a better attitude towards dealing with them more seriously. Okay. There's a lot of connection. You need to go online. You need to go into their website. Here's the link. You can find it on the website, but it has to do with the digital education. You Google that, and you can access it anywhere from any device, which is very, very helpful. We have to keep up with the times. So again, there's the components for the teachers. I can't believe people are still using CDs. I think that's hysterical. Of course, we have all of our listening materials on the downloadable resources. You just have to register on the website. I don't even have a CD player. I don't know if you do. So we do have 2 test books available with practice tests. And I am exactly at 45 minutes. Terry, I'm extremely proud of myself. I thought that would take longer. So this will give us time for the Q&A. And I am going to put this on, which has my personal email. So, if you have something that's not addressed here, feel free to reach out. I don't know how long it'll take me to get back, but I will do my best. Hello, Terry.
Okay. Hello, Sarah. Great. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. That was very insightful. I'm sure everyone will agree with me. So now let's start the Q&A section, because I can see there are a lot of questions out there. So now would be a very good chance for everyone to ask Sarah or myself questions about the ECPE writing, All-American, or anything in general. I want to remind you that, well, first of all, I would like to say that we reached capacity quite early for the webinar. So I want to apologize for any teachers that had difficulties entering the webinar. But I want to remind everyone that you can go on Facebook, which a lot of you I see have done, and you can ask your questions there if you're not joining us from the Click meeting platform. So I'll be keeping an eye on questions from both platforms, and we'll be conveying questions from Facebook here with you, Sarah, and everyone on the platform. So without further ado, I would like to start the Q&A section. So what I want you to do is ask your questions and put a question mark at the end. It's very important to put the question mark so that the system can register it and we can pop it up on screen for everybody to see. So now that the Q&A has been enabled, go ahead and ask your questions. Oh, I see. Well, I turned it on after you asked your question. I see Marina here ask, which grammar book do you recommend we use with All-American?
Reactivate is a great book to use. Some of the exercises are more in the Cambridge format, but it's equally helpful in supporting grammar issues with students, right? You know, like when they give the one word and you have to rephrase a sentence. Reactivate for me is a very friendly, user-friendly grammar book. I highly recommend it to use in conjunction with the All-American series.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so we have a question here. Here we go.
Do they handwrite with single or double spacing? Look, if they have very small handwriting, then single space is fine. But double spacing can be very helpful if they have a lot of corrections that they need to put in. But it's hard to read. And then if they're going to need, 4 pages? I suggest that they control the writing so it's not so big, and they just learn how to cross things out and correct and to do single space. But again, that's not an absolute. If you find that your students are, or a particular student is happier using double space because it gives them the ability, but they're writing in pencil, so they can erase. Like with Cambridge and pen, double spacing makes sense, but with the ECPE, no, I don't think it's necessary. How old should students be to handle this level of writing task? In Greece, the age of test taker appears to be decreasing. Yes, this is a problem, and this is a problem that the MLA has addressed. There is no age that they say students have to be, and ironically, 12-year-olds tend to do really well on this exam because they are always native speakers if they're sitting the exam at such a young age. But for me, they need to be 14, 15 minimum, because a lot of these issues are beyond their scope of knowledge, even in their own language. So what I find that I'm doing in my younger classes, and by young, I mean 14, 15, I'm not just teaching them English, I'm actually teaching them about genetic engineering. I'm just using that as an example for this webinar, or specific environmental issues that they haven't touched on at school. So for me, 14, 15, that's like a minimum. How many teaching hours do you recommend for the writing section per unit? This really depends on how strong your class is and how big your class is. But I would recommend at least 1/4 of your teaching week to be for the writing section. So if you're teaching, 5 hours a week, at least 1 hour and a little bit, an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
I don't exactly understand the question. Respacing, I was wondering if this was a rule. If you mean the double spacing, no, it's not a rule. There are no rules about the spacing or double spacing. It's not actually something that they have addressed at all. Common sense says that as long as it's legible, and since they're using pencil, they don't need like that extra space to make the corrections. As I said before, single spacing is fine, if that's what you mean. I'm not sure. What person would you recommend using? First, plural, third. Okay, so I mentioned this, but the first person is considered to be informal, so it's really only appropriate for the article. However, since they do ask for personal examples, if the student presents an example to support an opinion in an essay or a proposal, they can use first person as long as they support it with a formal register. Okay. I hope that answered that.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that I see so far, unless I'm missing something here.
There was someone in the beginning who posted like 5 questions altogether. I don't know if that attendee could repost, just copy paste and repost them.
Well, please, colleagues, ask any questions you'd like now. Now's a great opportunity. I see we have a comment from Yoria about loving to see a webinar going into more detail on the specifics for articles, proposals, and essays. Yoria, this is definitely something we can consider, so thank you for that suggestion.
But having said that, I mean, I would love to do that, but there is a lot of advice in the All-American about all of these. Oh, that's an interesting question. About the conclusion, MLA said something very interesting in one of their webinars. They said that even if there's not a conclusion, the student wouldn't be penalized. I was horrified. It's like a piece of writing without a conclusion. I think that depends on how much time they have and how creative they are. So yes, technically it is enough just to state what your opinion is, in other words, as much as possible. But I love something interesting, like a twist. So if they have the time and the imagination and creativity, a rhetorical question, like something like, perhaps what we should really be asking is, and then like direct the topic slightly somewhere else. I think that the assessors would love that, because that shows, that would get the reader engaged in the topic and get them thinking. So that. Candidates with dyslexia, you have to submit their official government papers in advance. And as far as I know, they're given extra time with any learning disability. I mean, they have something called dysorthografia, which I haven't understood exactly in English what that is. But yes, they are given extra time. I think there's even transcribers for people who can't write. But you need to discuss that with the Hellenic American Union before you register, before. Some even overuse the rubric. No. Absolutely do not use the rubric. I try to challenge my students not to use a single word from the rubric, except for what the topic is about. And formulaic expressions, they say clearly that you can use these formulaic C2 level expressions as long as they're used appropriately. But in the way that they comment on that, it's clear that they don't prefer them. So they're like crutches for your students. If your students are weaker, they should use them, but hopefully they'll develop up to a level where they won't need to use them and they'll have their own. So.
Well, we have a question here from Dimitra on our Facebook stream asking, could you explain authorial voice again, please?
I thought that I over-explained it, sorry. So authorial voice has to do with what they say in reader engagement. So what they mean is how interesting and original, unique, they even use that word, the writing is. I think that it might be the most challenging part, but it is something like their favorite part. It keeps on coming up over and over again. Interestingly, if you look at the benchmarks, they don't say good use of authorial voice, ever. But they do say lacking in authorial voice. So what they're saying is the student is using formulaic expressions, as we said before, or not really engaging the reader in the topic itself. So that's where we use things like, in articles, it's much more, it's much easier to do, like rhetorical questions. That's where we have interesting ideas, where we develop them. Ask them to look at issues from a psychological point of view. Like personally, they can say personally, even in the essay, genetic engineering does not sit well with me because I feel that is highly unnatural and ultimately will lead to the demise of the human race. That's like a very extreme opinion, but it is engaging, it is interesting, and it does show authorial voice. Other ways to show authorial voice are anything that the student can do to make their opinion clearer and more developed and essentially more interesting. So yeah, not an easy one for you to understand. I would highly suggest going through the benchmarks that are on their website and looking at the examiner's where they mention authorial voice. I don't know, Terry, can you answer that one?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is again a great suggestion. It's something that we can definitely consider, and as always, we will always post on our social media whenever we have any webinars, and we'll also send you emails. We'll reach out. We'll make sure you are aware. So that's a great suggestion.
It is a great suggestion. I would actually love to do one on not just the interview section, but on speaking in general and speaking skills, and have it apply also to the MSU, because they're so completely different, right? Because as you all know, the ECPE has a far more structured task, which does seem challenging, but at the same time, students can prepare for. So yes, Patricia, thank you for the suggestion. That's an interesting question, because I also teach B2, and I do teach them formal register, even starting with B2, of course, not to the extent of C2. I have to say there are a lot of exercises in the All-American writing sections. They need to lean in the beginning on certain syntaxes and expressions. The passages in All-American are quite challenging. So I would highly suggest that you read through them with a class together. I mean, they're available for the kids to listen to, but you can either listen to them or have them read them, and go over sentences and show them how the syntax in that sentence is more appropriate or more formal. There are other devices like using passive voice and inversions and conditionals. I mean, they need to, I have students who are grammar aces and then they use absolutely nothing in their writing. So they need to apply what they have learned in C2 level grammar to their actual writing. And I know that this sounds really awful, but it's helpful. I hate suggesting it, but it is something that I do. When I have a very weak writer who cannot get the formal flow, I have them memorize one of the model essays, memorize, or proposals or articles. Not so that they will ever use it, but something happens when they, not memorize word for word, but let's say read it over 50 times. It kind of integrates into their brain of how to use certain structures and sentences. So although I'm completely against this, memorize something and then regurgitate it and repeat it, that as an exercise for a student who is struggling with writing at a higher level, because it's not just about the formality, it's about the actual level, it could be helpful. I mean, try it out. Try it out.
Great, thank you. So here's a two-part question.
Okay, thank you for that.
And then here's the question.
This orthograph. It's just that I've never heard that term in Canada, ever. Yes. Look, if he has if he's a dysorthograph, I guess it's a noun, or he has dyslexia, the examiner, when they are, evaluator is aware of it when they are writing it. But MLA already stated that spelling mistakes are not penalized in any way as long as the word is comprehensible. Oh, that's a very good question. When I first came to Greece, the difference between B2 and C2 was 3 years. We actually did that it was always for Cambridge, of course, back then. But now I think everyone is in a rush because they're so stressed out about the national examinations they have to sit in the last year of high school. So everyone's pressuring to do it in 1 year, which really, unless the B2 student was strong, it's not enough. But the All-American course series is structured to be taught within that 1 year frame period. If you have the ability with your student or your class to stretch it out to 1.5 years, and you put in some TED Talks, you put in more discussions, you put in more activities that have to do with actual language, 1.5 years for me is ideal, all right? I mean, some students even need 2 years. The best is in January to do an evaluation test and let the students know if they are ready or not to sit the exam. Of course, I think that instinctively you already know if they are or not. That's what we do at the school that I teach at. So then we make recommendations based on that. That's the best I could answer, but it's a great question.
Great. So we have a question on Facebook. I can feel this one, Sarah. It says, your English language books are with British accent or with American? Well, this particular course, All American, as you guessed, with American accent. But in general, in Hamilton House, we have a wide range of courses, both in American English and British English.
And if I could just add to that, they don't care about your accent or your spelling. So ECPE accepts British spelling and CPE accepts American spellings. I think all examination boards are moving towards a standardized form. Of course, if you have a student sitting at Cambridge and the student says, I can't, it really grates on the examiner's ears. I know, because they say I can't. But, everything is acceptable.
Great. Yeah, great point, Sarah.
Why aren't there any MSU speaking and writing tasks in All American? It's a very good question. I was an MSU examiner for many, many years. I highly recommend my the test book with 7 and 8 practice tests that I have written myself, because there's a lot there. MSU speaking is the structure is just it's a freestyle. Really, as long as you're doing talking and personal talking, so there's the introduction, there's the structure that's online. MSU speaking is just speaking. So the ECPE speaking is so specific that we really needed the time and space to deal with that. The writing tasks, the actual topics, if you're preparing your students only for MSU, they can disregard a lot of the exercises. And that's actually an interesting idea for another supplement. Actually, I'm going to propose that, Terry, to Hamilton House Publishers, to come up with a supplement that makes this book what is applicable to MSU and to give some extra exercises. And Lenny, I hope I addressed that, but you just gave me very interesting food for thought. Thank you for that. Yeah. This is a very personal opinion and a teaching approach. I would definitely wait for December. I would not start right away, but with actual practice tests. There is so much practice in the All-American series that is exactly like the exam. So they're actually practicing for the exam. But, a lot of teachers do 80% test teaching, and I think that's a tragic mistake. They need to learn English, and there's no getting around it. I mean, even with the stress on flow and authorial voice and these things that the CFR is really, emphasizing, they can only acquire these abilities through actually learning the language, not testing over and over and over again. I'm highly against over-testing and testing from the very beginning. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one.
Yeah, it's great. No, I agree with you, Sarah, on that point. So I am scanning the 3 different platforms here, and I don't seem to see any other questions. Unless you guys have any other questions you'd like to ask, I think we've come to the end of today's session. But I will also give time for the questions to pour in for those shy teachers out there that are maybe thinking, should I ask that question or not? So now's your chance. Great. I love to see the thanks. Of course, it's our pleasure. And we thank you for your suggestions. Maybe we will see you in another session soon. And Sarah, we want to thank you again, both from Hamilton House and everyone that attended today's session for a lovely presentation. I think it was very, very helpful, and we look forward to having more with you in the future.
Thank you very much, Terry. It was actually really fun. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And I will do the best to address anything on the Facebook page, especially the comments and questions if you think of any more. So have a wonderful day. Here it stopped raining. Not swimming weather yet. Okay, Terry,
Great.
that went really well, I think, didn't it?
Well, we'll find out in the video. I want to remind all of you that we will post this video on our YouTube page. And now's a great chance to remind everyone out there who's watching that you can find all our past webinars on our YouTube page, as well as our Facebook pages. And just to keep up to date with all our future publications, for example, the writing supplement, we're going to make a post very soon as to when it's available for download, which is going to be very, very soon. In general, like, follow, share with your colleagues. We have lots of stuff being posted every day, useful resources, free resources. But great, yeah, no. So, guys, everyone, thank you for joining, Sarah. Thank you very much, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.